Translator quits, leaving Millionaire with $807 loss, until a poor, lonely 6-year-old girl says something that breaks his heart. Before we tell this moving tale of sadness and solitude, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more touching stories. The crystal chandelier trembled as Michael Harrison slammed his fist against the mahogany desk. Papers scattered like autumn leaves across his corner office on the 52nd floor of Harrison International Tower. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below him. But today the view offered no comfort. The empire his father had spent 40 years building was crumbling in a single day. "Sir, I'm truly sorry, but my decision is final." Hiroshi Tanaka stood firm near the door, his resignation letter still warm in Michael's trembling hands. For 15 years, Hiroshi had been more than just the head translator. He was the bridge between Harrison International and their most lucrative Japanese partnerships. His weathered face showed genuine remorse, but his resolve remained unshakable. Michael's blue eyes blazed with desperation as he rose from his chair, his 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the Persian rug his father had brought back from Tehran decades ago. "Hiroshi, you can't do this to me. The Yamamoto deal alone is worth $867 million. Without you, I'll lose everything my father built. Every brick of this tower, every job, every dream he poured into this company." The 60-year-old Japanese man adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his hands trembling slightly. Behind his stoic exterior, Michael could see the pain of a man torn between loyalty and love. "Mr. Harrison, my wife's cancer has returned. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months, and I've already missed too many of her treatments for business meetings. I've trained 3 assistants over the years, but none can handle the complex legal documents for tomorrow's signing. Those contracts contain terminology that dates back to the Meiji Restoration, language that even modern Japanese lawyers struggle with." Michael felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came with overwhelming stress. His cardiologist had warned him about pushing too hard, but how could he slow down when everything was falling apart? "The contracts aren't just business documents, Hiroshi. They're written in classical Japanese legal terminology that requires not just translation, but cultural interpretation. If I can't present them properly translated by noon tomorrow, Yamamoto Industries will walk away. That's not just money, that's jobs for 12,000 employees, families who depend on us." As Hiroshi bowed respectfully and walked toward the door, Michael's mind raced through every possible solution. He'd already contacted 7 translation services, 3 universities, and even the Japanese consulate. The answer was always the same. This level of complexity required weeks, not hours. "Hiroshi, wait!" Michael called out desperately. "What if I doubled your salary, tripled it? I could arrange for the best oncologist in the country to treat your wife." The older man paused at the door, his shoulders sagging with the weight of impossible choices. "Mr. Harrison, some things are more valuable than money. I've served your family faithfully for 15 years, but my wife needs me now. I pray you find another way, but I cannot be that way." As the door closed with a soft click, Michael collapsed into his leather chair, the same chair his father had occupied for 3 decades. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office, matching the darkness creeping into his heart. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, investors, and journalists who'd somehow caught wind of the crisis. But he ignored them all. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. This wasn't just about his personal fortune, though losing everything would be devastating. This was about the legacy of Harrison International, about the thousands of families who depended on the company for their livelihoods, about honoring his father's memory and the values he'd instilled. Michael opened his desk drawer and pulled out a faded photograph of his father cutting the ribbon at the company's first major project. David Harrison had started with nothing but determination and a dream to build something meaningful. Now his son was about to lose it all because of documents written in a language he couldn't read. The irony wasn't lost on him. In a world connected by technology, where information traveled at the speed of light, he was defeated by the simple barrier of language. Tomorrow would either be the dawn of a new era or the funeral of his father's legacy. Little did he know that his salvation was about to come in the smallest, most unexpected package imaginable, a package that would challenge everything he thought he knew about miracles, intelligence, and the mysterious ways that hope finds us in our darkest moments. The homeless shelter on East 34th Street buzzed with the usual evening chaos of survival and community. Families lined up for dinner while volunteers ladled steaming soup into worn bowls, their faces reflecting the quiet dignity of people who'd learned to find grace in small mercies. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on tired faces that had seen too much hardship, yet somehow still held onto fragments of hope. In the children's corner, past the donated toys and hand-me-down books, 6-year-old Emma Wilson sat cross-legged on a thin mattress that had seen better days. Her golden blonde hair caught the light as she bent over a tattered Japanese children's book, its pages yellowed with age and worn soft from countless readings. Her bright blue eyes moved across the complex characters with surprising speed, her small lips silently forming the words with perfect pronunciation. The book had been her grandfather's most treasured possession, a collection of traditional Japanese folk tales he'd acquired during his 20 years living in Kyoto. Each page was filled with intricate illustrations of ancient temples, wise cranes, and brave children who overcame impossible odds through kindness and determination. "Emma, honey, it's time for dinner," called Sarah Martinez, one of the shelter's most dedicated volunteers. The 45-year-old former teacher approached with gentle steps, always amazed by this extraordinary little girl who seemed far too wise for her age. Sarah had worked at the shelter for 8 years, but she'd never encountered a child quite like Emma. Emma looked up from her book, her cherubic face marked by an intelligence that both fascinated and slightly unnerved most adults. There was something almost otherworldly about the depth of understanding in those blue eyes, as if she possessed knowledge that belonged to someone much older. "Just finishing this page, Miss Sarah. It's about a little bird who loses her way in a terrible storm, but finds something better than what she was looking for. She finds her true purpose." Sarah knelt beside her on the worn linoleum floor, studying the complex Japanese characters that looked like intricate artwork to her untrained eyes. "Sweetie, how do you read this? I've been to college, and I can barely manage Spanish. Most adults can't understand Japanese, especially written Japanese." A shadow of profound sadness crossed Emma's face, the kind of grief that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders to bear. "My grandpa taught me. He lived in Japan for 20 years before he came to America and met my grandma. We used to read together every single night before—" Her voice trailed off, and she clutched the book tighter against her chest, as if it could somehow bring him back. "Before what, honey?" Sarah asked softly, though she suspected she already knew the answer. She'd learned Emma's heartbreaking story from the social workers, how this brilliant child had lost everything in the span of 6 months. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears that spoke of a pain far beyond her years. "Before the angels took him to heaven 2 days ago, but he promised he'd come to my birthday party tomorrow. I'm turning 7, and he said he had a very special surprise for me. He always kept his promises, Miss Sarah. Always." Sarah's heart ached for this brilliant child who had already experienced more loss than most adults could handle. Emma's grandmother had passed away 6 months ago from complications related to diabetes, leaving her in the care of an overwhelmed foster system. Her grandfather had tried to gain custody, but his own failing health made it impossible. When he passed away suddenly from a heart attack, Emma found herself truly alone for the first time in her short life. The shelter had become her temporary home, while social workers searched for a permanent placement that could handle a child with her unique needs. "Tell me about your grandpa's surprise," Sarah said softly, settling beside Emma on the thin mattress. and careful not to disturb the other children who were beginning to gather for the evening meal. Emma's face brightened despite her sadness, and for a moment she looked like the 7-year-old child she was supposed to be. He said that one day my gift for languages would help someone very important, someone who really needed help. And when that day came, something magical would happen. He always said I was special because I could learn languages like other kids learn to ride bicycles or play hopscotch. It was true. Emma's gift was extraordinary, even miraculous. In addition to English and Japanese, she was already fluent in Spanish from conversations with other shelter residents, and she'd picked up basic Mandarin from a Chinese family who'd stayed there briefly. Her grandfather had called it a gift from God, a special purpose that would reveal itself when the time was right. He also said, Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, that sometimes angels send us exactly the right person at exactly the right time, but we have to have our hearts open to recognize them. Do you think that's true, Miss Sarah? Michael Harrison's black Mercedes glided through the darkening streets of Manhattan like a sleek shadow, its leather interior providing little comfort from the storm of anxiety raging in his mind. After a grueling day of failed phone calls, desperate meetings, and increasingly panicked conversations with board members, he'd decided to clear his head with a drive through the city his father had loved so dearly. The familiar streets looked different tonight, somehow more vivid and meaningful than usual. Maybe it was the stress, or maybe it was the growing realization that he might be seeing his empire from this perspective for the last time. Every building seemed to hold a memory, every corner a reminder of the life he'd built on his father's foundation. The radio crackled with the evening news, and Michael's stomach clenched as he heard his company's name. Harrison International stock plummeted 15% today amid rumors of the failed Yamamoto partnership. Industry experts predict this could signal the beginning of a massive corporate restructuring, potentially affecting thousands of jobs across the tri-state area. We'll continue to follow this developing story. Michael switched it off, unable to bear another word of speculation about his family's potential downfall. The weight of public scrutiny added another layer to his already overwhelming burden. This wasn't just a private business crisis anymore. It was becoming a spectacle, a cautionary tale about the fragility of success. Traffic slowed to a crawl near the shelter district, and Michael found himself studying the faces of people on the sidewalks with new eyes. These were the forgotten ones, the invisible Americans who struggled daily just to survive, yet somehow found the strength to keep going. There was something humbling about their resilience, something that made his own problems seem both more and less significant at the same time. A memory surfaced unbidden from his childhood, his father taking him to serve Thanksgiving dinner at a shelter when Michael was 12 years old. He'd complained about missing football games with his friends, but his father had been insistent. Success means nothing if we don't lift others up with us, David Harrison had said, ladling mashed potatoes onto plastic plates. Remember, son, every person has a story worth hearing, and every story has something to teach us if we're wise enough to listen. At the time, Michael had thought it was just one of his father's philosophical moments, the kind of wisdom that sounded good but didn't have much practical application. Now, facing the potential loss of everything his father had built, those words carried new weight. As his car inched forward through the traffic, Michael noticed a small figure sitting on the shelter steps, reading under a flickering streetlight. Something about the child's concentrated expression reminded him of himself as a boy, poring over his father's business books while other kids played outside. There was an intensity there, a focus that seemed almost adult in its seriousness. The girl, he could see now that it was a little girl with blonde hair, looked up suddenly, as if sensing his gaze. Even from 30 feet away, through the tinted windows of his car, her extraordinary blue eyes seemed to pierce right through him. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, they simply looked at each other across the divide of wealth and poverty, privilege and need. There was something almost mystical about the encounter, something that made Michael's heart skip a beat in recognition of what? He couldn't name it, but he felt as if he'd just witnessed something significant, something that would matter in ways he couldn't yet understand. Then traffic moved forward, breaking the spell, and Michael continued toward his empty penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. But something about that brief encounter lingered in his mind like a half-remembered dream. There had been something almost otherworldly about the child's intelligence, a depth and wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. Later that night, as Michael sat in his mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by the untranslatable documents that would seal his company's fate, he found himself thinking about the girl with the piercing blue eyes. His father's words echoed in his memory with new urgency. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Keep your heart open, even in the darkest moments. He shook his head, dismissing the thought as desperate fantasy born of stress and exhaustion. What could a homeless child possibly have to do with saving a billion-dollar corporation? The very idea was absurd, the kind of magical thinking that belonged in fairy tales, not in the harsh reality of international business. If only he knew that sometimes the most impossible solutions are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to be desperate enough to recognize them. The next morning dawned grey and cold, with heavy clouds that seemed to mirror Michael's mood as he sat in his corner office at 6 a.m., staring at the Japanese contracts that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. His usually pristine appearance showed signs of a sleepless night. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt was wrinkled, and his normally perfectly styled hair was disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. The contracts lay spread across his desk like pieces of an impossible puzzle. Each page was filled with elegant Japanese characters that flowed like artwork. But to Michael, they might as well have been random brushstrokes. These weren't just business documents, they were the key to his company's survival, and he couldn't read a single word. His coffee had grown cold hours ago, forgotten amid the dozens of phone calls he'd made to translation services, universities, and anyone who might possibly help. The answers were always the same. This level of classical Japanese legal terminology required specialized expertise that couldn't be rushed. What he needed done in hours would normally take weeks. His assistant, Patricia Williams, knocked softly before entering with another cup of coffee and a worried expression that had become her permanent fixture over the past 24 hours. The 65-year-old woman had been with the company since Michael's father's time, starting as a secretary and working her way up to become David Harrison's most trusted confidant. She'd seen the company through recessions, hostile takeovers, and every crisis imaginable, but nothing quite like this. The board is demanding answers. Michael, she said, setting the coffee down carefully among the scattered papers. Mr. Yamamoto's representatives will be here at noon, and we still don't have a translator capable of handling these documents. The press is starting to gather downstairs. Somehow word has leaked about the crisis. Michael rubbed his tired eyes, feeling every one of his 38 years weighing on his shoulders. I've called every translation service in the city, Patricia. I've contacted Columbia, NYU, even reached out to the Japanese Cultural Center. None of them can guarantee accuracy with this level of legal complexity. We're talking about documents that contain terminology dating back to feudal Japan, language that even modern Japanese lawyers would struggle with. Patricia sat down across from him in the same chair she'd occupied during countless meetings with his father. Her maternal instincts, honed by decades of watching over the Harrison family, were in full force. What about taking a different approach? Maybe we could ask for an extension, explain the circumstances. Surely they'd understand that losing our head translator was beyond our control. Michael shook his head. Michael, knowing she was grasping at straws just as desperately as he was. You know Japanese business culture better than that, Patricia. Honor and face are everything to them. This isn't just about translation. It's about demonstrating respect and competence. If we can't present these documents properly translated, they'll see it as a fundamental failure of our organization. In their eyes, a company that can't manage its own translation needs can't be trusted with $1 billion partnership. Through his window, Michael could see the early morning bustle of the city below. Somewhere down there, 12,000 people were starting their day, unaware that their jobs hung in the balance of his next decision. The security guards in the lobby, the maintenance staff, the executives in their corner offices, all of them trusting that Harrison International would continue to provide for their families. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. This wasn't just about his personal fortune, though losing everything would be devastating. This was about honoring his father's legacy, about being worthy of the trust placed in him by thousands of employees who'd built their lives around the stability of the company. His phone buzzed with another call from a board member, but he let it go to voicemail. How could he explain that the fate of his father's empire rested on finding someone who could read documents that even university professors would struggle with? How could he admit that all his wealth and connections were useless against the simple barrier of language? Meanwhile, across the city in the homeless shelter, Emma Wilson was already awake, sitting by the large window that faced east toward the rising sun. In her small hands, she held her grandfather's Japanese book, reading the story of the lost bird one more time. Today was her 7th birthday, and despite everything, despite the grief, the uncertainty, the fear of what would happen to her next, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. "Grandpa," she whispered to the morning sky, her breath fogging the glass. "You promised you'd send someone special today. I'm ready for whatever surprise you have planned. I promise I'll have my heart open just like you taught me." She didn't know that across the city, a desperate man was about to make a decision that would bring their worlds together in the most unexpected way possible. By 10:30, Michael's office resembled a war room under siege. Board members filled every available chair, their faces grave as they discussed damage control strategies that felt increasingly futile. The mahogany conference table was covered with financial projections, legal documents and contingency plans that all led to the same devastating conclusion. The weight of impending failure pressed down on everyone present like a suffocating blanket. These were some of the most successful business minds in New York, yet they were completely powerless against the simple problem of language barriers and time constraints. "We need to consider bankruptcy protection," suggested board member Robert Chen, his voice heavy with resignation. As the company's head of legal affairs, he'd been running worst-case scenarios all night. "If we can't salvage the Yamamoto deal, the ripple effect will destroy our other partnerships. The Korean deal will fall through, the European expansion will collapse, and we'll lose our credit lines within weeks." Michael stood at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass, watching the city that had been his family's kingdom for 4 decades. Below, he could see the news vans gathering like vultures, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like accusations. "My father built this company from nothing," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of legacy and loss. "He survived the recession of '91, the dot-com crash, even 2008. He always said that Harrison International wasn't just a business, it was a family, a community, a responsibility to something bigger than profit." "Then what do you propose?" asked Elena Rodriguez, the company's CFO and Michael's closest advisor. Her usually confident demeanor was cracked with stress, and her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled through the financial reports. "We've exhausted every option. The most qualified translator in the city says these documents would take weeks to properly translate, not hours. Even if we could find someone willing to rush the job, one mistake in interpretation could cost us everything anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room understood the gravity of the situation, but no one had any solutions left to offer. They were successful, intelligent, resourceful people, yet they were defeated by something as simple as the inability to read Japanese characters. Michael's mind wandered to memories of his father during previous crises. David Harrison had possessed an almost supernatural ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. He'd often spoken about trusting intuition, about being open to possibilities that logic couldn't explain. Sometimes, he'd said during the 2008 crisis, the answer comes from the most unexpected place. The key is recognizing it when it appears. In his growing desperation, Michael found himself thinking about the mysterious girl from the night before. Something about her intensity, the way she'd been reading under that streetlight with such focus, nagged at him. It was impossible, of course. A child couldn't possibly help save $1 billion corporation. But that moment of connection, that strange sense of recognition, wouldn't leave his mind. "I need some air," he announced suddenly, grabbing his coat from the hook behind his desk. "Patricia, reschedule everything. I'll be back in an hour." The board members exchanged worried glances as Michael rushed toward the door. "Michael, where are you going?" Elena called after him. "We have less than 2 hours before the Yamamoto meeting." But he was already gone, leaving behind a room full of confused executives and unanswered questions. Sometimes desperate times called for desperate measures, and right now he was willing to explore even the most unlikely possibilities. His father had always trusted his instincts, even when they led him into uncharted territory. As his car pulled up to the homeless shelter 20 minutes later, Michael felt foolish. What was he doing here? How could a child possibly help save his company? But something deeper than logic propelled him forward. A feeling that his father's spirit was somehow guiding him to this moment, this place, this impossible possibility. The morning sun had burned through the earlier clouds, casting everything in sharp relief. The shelter looked different in daylight, less desperate, more hopeful somehow. People were going about their daily routines with quiet dignity, and children were playing in the small courtyard with the kind of joy that transcends circumstances. Inside the shelter's main room, Emma Wilson was helping serve breakfast to the other residents, her small hands carefully carrying trays that seemed too big for her delicate frame. She moved with purpose and grace, somehow managing to bring smiles to faces that had forgotten how to hope. When she looked up and saw the well-dressed man in the expensive coat standing in the doorway, her heart skipped a beat. The man from the car last night was here, in her world, and she felt the electric anticipation her grandfather had always described when something important was about to happen. "Grandpa," she whispered to herself, her eyes never leaving Michael's face, "is this the surprise you promised?" She didn't know yet that she was looking at Michael Harrison, the man whose entire world was about to change because of a little girl's extraordinary gift. She didn't know that his company employed 12,000 people, or that billion-dollar deals hung in the balance. All she knew was that the sad man from last night was here, and her grandfather had taught her that when people came into your life unexpectedly, it was usually for a very important reason. The shelter's main room fell quiet as Michael Harrison stepped inside, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking against the worn linoleum floor. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as residents took in his expensive cashmere coat, his gold watch, and the unmistakable aura of wealth that surrounded him like an invisible force field. He was so clearly out of place that he might as well have been wearing a sign that said, "Billionaire." Emma Wilson stood frozen beside the breakfast table, a plastic tray trembling in her small hands. The man from the car last night was here, in her world, and she felt the electric anticipation her grandfather had always described when something monumentally important was about to happen. Her heart pounded with the strange certainty that this moment had been destined, that all the grief and loss of the past few days had been leading to this exact encounter. Sarah Martinez, the volunteer coordinator, approached Michael with professional caution, mixed with curiosity. In her 8 years at the shelter, she'd seen plenty of wealthy donors, but they usually came during organized events, not alone on a Tuesday morning, looking like they'd barely slept. "Can I help you, sir? Are you here about a donation? I'm Sarah, the volunteer coordinator. Michael felt suddenly self-conscious, acutely aware of how out of place he looked among these struggling families. The contrast between his world and theirs felt almost obscene. His coat probably cost more than most of these people saw in 6 months. This might sound strange, but I saw a little girl here last night. She was reading outside under the streetlight. He paused, realizing how insane he must sound. I think she might be able to help me with something important. Sarah's protective instincts immediately kicked in. She'd seen too many cases of people trying to exploit vulnerable children, and wealthy men showing up asking about specific children always raised red flags. Sir, I'm going to need you to be more specific about what kind of help you're looking for. We take the safety of our residents very seriously. Emma, called out Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly Hispanic woman who'd become something of a grandmother figure to the shelter's children. There's someone here who wants to meet you, mija. Emma approached slowly, her blue eyes never leaving Michael's face. Up close, he could see the extraordinary intelligence that had captivated him from across the street the night before. This wasn't the vacant stare of a typical child. This was the gaze of someone who saw far more than she should at her age, someone who possessed wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 7 years. "Hello," Emma said simply, her voice carrying a strange confidence that seemed almost adult in its composure. "My grandpa told me someone special would come today. Is that you?" The directness of her question hit Michael like a physical blow. There was something almost mystical about this child, something that made him feel as if she could see straight into his soul. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma Wilson. Today's my birthday. I'm 7 years old." She paused, studying his face with unnerving intensity, as if she were reading a book written in his expressions. "You look very sad, mister. Sadder than anyone should look. Are you in trouble? Big trouble?" The innocence of her question, combined with her uncanny perceptiveness, struck him to his core. Here was a homeless child, someone who had every reason to be focused on her own problems, asking if he needed help. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was a billionaire seeking assistance from someone who owned nothing but the clothes on her back. "Yes, Emma, I am in trouble, very big trouble." Michael knelt down to her level, bringing himself into her world, both literally and figuratively. "My name is Michael, and I have some very important papers that are written in Japanese. I need someone to translate them today, and if I can't find someone to help me, a lot of people, thousands of people, will lose their jobs." Emma's eyes widened with sudden understanding, and she reached into her worn backpack, a donation bag that had seen better days, and pulled out her precious Japanese children's book. The pages were yellow with age, and the binding was held together with tape, but she handled it like the treasure it was. "Like this kind of Japanese, Mr. Michael." Michael's heart stopped as he saw the complex characters on the page. They were similar to what he'd been staring at all morning, the same flowing script that had been his nemesis for the past 24 hours. "Emma, can you actually read that? Really read it and understand what it means?" "Of course," she replied matter-of-factly, as if he'd asked her whether she could tie her shoes. "My grandpa taught me. He lived in Japan for 20 years and spoke it like he was born there. He said I had a special gift for languages because my brain works differently than other kids' brains. He said God gave me this gift for a reason, and someday I'd understand what that reason was." She paused, her expression growing wistful. "He died 2 days ago, but he promised he'd still come to my birthday party today. He said he'd send someone who needed my help, and when I helped them, something magical would happen." As Michael stared at this extraordinary child, feeling the weight of impossibility and hope warring in his chest, he began to understand that sometimes miracles do come in the smallest packages. Sometimes salvation arrives in the form of a 7-year-old girl with golden hair and eyes that seem to hold all the wisdom of the universe. "Emma," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite name. "What if I told you that helping me might be the most important thing anyone has ever asked you to do?" Emma's question hung in the air like a prayer waiting to be answered. Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion as he looked into those impossibly wise blue eyes. Around them, the shelter had grown completely silent. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. "Emma," Michael began carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to ask you might sound impossible. I have documents that are so important they could save or destroy my company. They're written in very old Japanese, the kind that even Japanese professors have trouble with. If you could really read them and tell me what they say, you wouldn't just be helping me. You'd be saving the jobs of 12,000 people." Emma clutched her grandfather's book tighter against her chest, her small fingers tracing the worn cover. Grandpa always said that when someone needs help, and you have the ability to help them, it's not really a choice. It's what you're supposed to do. That's what good people do. Sarah stepped closer, her protective instincts warring with growing amazement. "Emma, honey, are you sure you understand what this man is asking? This sounds like very grown-up work." Emma nodded solemnly, her expression far too serious for a 7-year-old. "Miss Sarah, remember when Mr. Chen, from the Chinese family, couldn't understand the medical forms for his sick baby? I helped translate them from English to Mandarin, and the doctors were able to help little May get better. Grandpa said that was practice for something bigger." Michael's heart pounded as he realized he was witnessing something that defied logical explanation. "Emma, would you be willing to come with me to my office, just to look at the papers? I promise you'll be safe, and I'll bring you right back." "I can't let a child leave with a stranger," Sarah interjected firmly. "I don't care how much money you have or how desperate you are." "Then come with us," Michael said quickly. "Bring whoever you need to bring. I'll pay for a taxi, a limousine, whatever makes you comfortable. I just need Emma to look at these documents for 10 minutes. If she can't help, I'll bring her right back, and that'll be the end of it." Emma looked up at Sarah with pleading eyes. "Miss Sarah, what if this is why Grandpa taught me Japanese? What if this is the surprise he promised? He always said that sometimes we have to take chances to do the right thing." Sarah felt torn between protecting Emma and recognizing that this child had gifts that might truly make a difference. She'd watched Emma effortlessly switch between languages, had seen her read books that would challenge high school students, if there was even a chance that Emma could help. "If I agree to this," Sarah said slowly, "I'm coming with you every step of the way. Emma doesn't leave my sight, and we return here within 2 hours." Michael nodded eagerly. "Of course, absolutely. Whatever you need." He pulled out his phone and called his driver. "James, I need you at the East 34th Street shelter immediately. And James, this might be the most important pickup you've ever made." As they waited for the car, Emma sat down beside Michael on one of the shelter's worn benches. "Mr. Michael, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." "Are you scared?" The simple question cut straight to his heart. "Yes, Emma, I'm very scared. I'm scared of letting down all the people who depend on me. I'm scared of failing my father's memory. I'm scared that I'm not good enough to handle all this responsibility." Emma reached out and patted his hand with surprising gentleness. "Grandpa used to tell me that being scared just means something is really important to you. He said brave people aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who do the right thing, even when they are afraid." When the black Mercedes arrived, Emma's eyes widened at the luxury, but she maintained her composure with remarkable grace. As they drove through the streets of Manhattan toward Harrison International Tower, she pressed her face to the window, watching the city transform from the struggling neighborhoods she knew to the gleaming towers of wealth and power. "Mr. Michael," she said softly, "I think I understand now why Grandpa sent you to me." The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt like ascending to another world entirely. Emma stood between Michael and Sarah, her small hand clutching her grandfather's book, while her eyes took in the polished brass, the mirrored walls, and the soft music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I've never been this high up before," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "It's like being in the clouds." When the doors opened to reveal the executive floor of Harrison International, Emma stepped out with the same calm dignity she'd shown at the shelter. The receptionist, a woman named Margaret, who'd worked there for 20 years, nearly dropped her coffee cup at the sight of a homeless child in the company's inner sanctum. "Mr. Harrison," Margaret's voice carried a mixture of confusion and concern. "The board is waiting in the conference room. Mr. Yamamoto's representatives will be here in 30 minutes. "I know, Margaret. This is Emma, and she might be able to help us with our translation problem." Michael's voice carried a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Could you please show Sarah to the guest lounge and make her comfortable? Emma and I will be in my office." Patricia appeared from around the corner, her expression shifting from panic to bewilderment as she took in the scene. "Michael, what's going on? Who is this child?" "Patricia, meet Emma Wilson." "Emma, this is Patricia. She's been helping my family for longer than I've been alive." Michael placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma has a very special gift with languages." Emma extended her small hand to Patricia with perfect manners. "Nice to meet you, Miss Patricia. Mr. Michael says you're very important to his company." Patricia shook the tiny hand, completely charmed despite her confusion. "Well, aren't you a polite little thing? But Michael, surely you don't think—" "Just trust me on this. Patricia, please." As they entered Michael's office, Emma's eyes went wide at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the sprawling view of Manhattan below. But her attention quickly focused on the papers scattered across the massive desk. She approached them with the same careful reverence she showed her grandfather's book. "These are very old Japanese words," she said, running her finger above the characters without touching them. "Grandpa taught me about writing like this. It's called classical Japanese. And it's what important people used to write when they wanted to make very serious promises." Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Can you read them, Emma? Can you tell me what they say?" Emma picked up the first page, holding it carefully in both hands. Her lips moved silently as she read, her expression growing more serious with each line. "This page is about honor and respect between business families. It says that the Yamamoto family promises to work with the Harrison family like they were blood relatives, sharing profits and protecting each other's interests." Patricia gasped from the doorway. "Michael, how is this possible?" But Emma was already reaching for the second page, her concentration absolute. "This one is more complicated. It talks about specific numbers and percentages, but also about trust that can't be broken. It says that if either family breaks their promises, they will lose face, not just with each other, but with all of Japanese society." Michael felt his legs go weak. "Emma, are you absolutely certain? These documents will determine the future of thousands of people." Emma looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. "Mr. Michael, Grandpa always said that words are sacred things. When you translate someone's words, you're carrying their heart from one language to another. I would never lie about something so important." She continued reading, page after page, explaining complex legal concepts in simple terms that made perfect sense. With each translation, Michael felt the weight of disaster lifting from his shoulders. Not only could Emma read the documents, but she understood their deeper cultural meanings in ways that might have escaped even professional translators. "There's something else," Emma said softly, looking up from the final page. "These papers say that Mr. Yamamoto specifically requested this old style of writing to test whether your company truly respects Japanese culture. If you can present these documents with proper understanding, it proves you're worthy of his trust." Michael knelt down beside her chair, his eyes bright with tears of relief and amazement. "Emma, do you understand what you've just done? You've saved my company. You've saved thousands of jobs. His voice broke with emotion. "I helped someone who needed help," Emma said simply. "That's what Grandpa would have wanted me to do." The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as the board members waited anxiously for Michael's return. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the Yamamoto Industries limousine pulling up to the building's entrance. Time was running out, and they had no idea whether their CEO had found a miracle or lost his mind entirely. "Where is he?" muttered Robert Chen, checking his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The most important meeting in the company's history, and he disappears to chase some impossible fantasy. Elena Rodriguez paced near the windows, her usual composure cracking under the pressure. Maybe we should prepare for the worst. If Michael can't present proper translations, we need to be ready with damage control. The door burst open, and Michael strode in with Emma beside him, her small hand confidently holding a folder of papers. The board members stared in stunned silence at the sight of their CEO, accompanied by a 7-year-old girl who looked like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced, his voice ringing with newfound confidence, "I'd like you to meet Emma Wilson, our new translator for the Yamamoto documents." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Robert Chen found his voice. "Michael, have you lost your mind? This is a child, not a professional translator. We're talking about billion-dollar contracts, not bedtime stories." Emma stepped forward with remarkable poise, her blue eyes meeting each board member's gaze without flinching. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're worried, but I've read all the documents, and I can explain exactly what Mr. Yamamoto wants from your company." Before anyone could respond, Patricia entered with a formal announcement. "Mr. Yamamoto and his delegation have arrived. They're being escorted to the conference room now." Michael knelt down beside Emma one final time. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart? These are very important people, and they might seem scary, but they're just businessmen who want to make sure we can be trusted." Emma nodded solemnly. "Grandpa always said that important people are just regular people with bigger responsibilities. I'll do my best, Mr. Michael." The doors opened, and Kenji Yamamoto entered with his delegation of 5 impeccably dressed executives. Yamamoto was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His gaze immediately fell on Emma, and his expression shifted from business formality to genuine surprise. "Mr. Harrison," Yamamoto said in accented English, his tone carefully neutral, "I was not expecting such a young translator." Michael felt his heart pounding, but Emma stepped forward before he could speak. To everyone's amazement, she bowed respectfully in the traditional Japanese manner and began speaking in fluent Japanese, her childish voice carrying perfect pronunciation and formal inflections. Yamamoto's eyes widened in shock as Emma continued speaking, clearly explaining something complex and important. The other Japanese executives exchanged amazed glances, whispering among themselves in rapid Japanese. Finally, Yamamoto responded in Japanese, his tone warm and respectful. Emma listened carefully, then turned to translate for the room. "Mr. Yamamoto says he's very impressed that Mr. Michael found someone who can read classical Japanese. He says it shows great respect for tradition and proves that Harrison International understands the importance of cultural honor." Yamamoto nodded approvingly and spoke again in Japanese. Emma translated, "He wants to proceed with reviewing the documents, but he'd like me to explain not just what they say, but what they mean in Japanese culture." For the next hour, Emma demonstrated a mastery of language and cultural understanding that left everyone speechless. She didn't just translate words, she explained concepts, cultural nuances, and the deeper meanings behind formal Japanese business language. She handled complex financial terms with ease and showed an intuitive understanding of Japanese business etiquette that impressed even Yamamoto himself. When she finished presenting the final document, Yamamoto stood and bowed deeply to her, a gesture of profound respect that shocked everyone in the room. Then he turned to Michael with a broad smile. "Mr. Harrison, in 40 years of international business, I have never encountered such remarkable translation work. This young lady doesn't just speak our language, she understands our hearts. Harrison International has proven itself worthy of our complete trust and partnership." As the Japanese delegation prepared to sign the contracts, Yamamoto approached Emma one final time, speaking softly in Japanese. Her face lit up with joy as she responded, and then she turned to Michael with tears in her eyes. Mr. Yamamoto says he has a granddaughter my age in Tokyo, and he's going to tell her about the brave American girl who helped save a company with her special gift. The contract signing proceeded with ceremonial precision, each page carefully reviewed and executed with the solemnity befitting a deal worth nearly $1 billion. Emma sat quietly beside Michael, occasionally translating subtle questions or cultural references that arose during the process. Her presence had transformed what could have been a disaster into a celebration of international cooperation and respect. As the final signatures were placed on the documents, Yamamoto raised his glass of tea in a toast to new partnerships built on understanding, respect, and the wisdom that sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms. After the Japanese delegation departed, the conference room erupted in celebration. Board members who had been preparing for corporate disaster just hours earlier were now congratulating each other on the most successful deal in the company's history. But Michael's attention remained focused on Emma, who sat quietly watching the adults celebrate around her. "You did it, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling beside her chair. "You saved everything. I don't know how to thank you." Emma smiled, but there was a wistfulness in her expression. "I'm glad I could help. Mr. Michael, Grandpa would be proud. But now I should probably go back to the shelter. Miss Sarah is waiting for me." The simplicity of her statement hit Michael like a physical blow. Here was a child who had just saved his billion-dollar empire, and she was planning to return to a homeless shelter as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The injustice of it overwhelmed him. "Emma, wait." Michael's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had occurred and what it meant for both their futures. "I made you a promise, remember? I said if you could translate those documents, I'd give you a special present." Emma's eyes brightened with curiosity. "I remember, but helping people should be its own reward, shouldn't it?" Patricia approached them, her eyes red with tears of relief and amazement. "Michael, I've been with this company for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened. This child has a gift that's absolutely extraordinary." Michael nodded, his mind already forming a plan that felt both audacious and absolutely right. "Emma, what would you say if I told you that your present isn't just one thing? It's a whole new life." Before Emma could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, having been escorted up by security. Her face showed a mixture of relief at seeing Emma safe and bewilderment at the celebration happening around them. "Emma, honey, are you ready to go back now?" Sarah asked gently. "Actually," Michael said, standing up and moving to include Sarah in the conversation, "I'd like to discuss Emma's future with both of you. What happened here today proves that Emma has gifts that could change not just her life, but the lives of others. I'd like to offer her something that could make all the difference." Emma looked between the adults, sensing the importance of the moment, but not fully understanding what was being proposed. "What kind of something, Mr. Michael?" Michael took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would sound impossible, but feeling absolutely certain it was right. "Emma, how would you feel about never having to live in a shelter again? About having your own room, your own books, your own everything? About going to the best schools where they can help you develop your incredible gifts?" Sarah gasped, immediately understanding the implications. "Mr. Harrison, are you talking about adoption?" "I'm talking about giving Emma the life she deserves," Michael said firmly. "I'm talking about making sure that someone with her extraordinary abilities has every opportunity to use them to help others. I'm talking about family." Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder and something that looked like hope. "You mean you want me to be your little girl?" Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Emma, I lost my parents several years ago, and I've been alone ever since. You've lost your grandparents, and you've been alone too. Maybe we were meant to find each other. Maybe your grandfather's promise about someone special coming to your birthday party was about more than just today." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Emma's response. She looked down at her grandfather's book, then back up at Michael with those impossibly wise blue eyes. "Grandpa always said that families aren't just about blood, They're about people who choose to love and take care of each other. Is that what you're asking? If we can choose to be a family. Michael knelt down to her level one more time, his heart full of love for this remarkable child who had changed his life in the span of a few hours. That's exactly what I'm asking, Emma. Will you let me be your dad? Emma's answer came in the form of her small arms, wrapping around his neck in the tightest hug either of them had ever experienced. 3 months later, the transformation in both their lives was nothing short of miraculous. Emma's bedroom in Michael's penthouse overlooked Central Park, its walls lined with books in 7 different languages. Her gift for languages had proven even more extraordinary than anyone had initially realized. She was already fluent in French and Italian and had begun learning Mandarin and Arabic with the same ease that other children learned to ride bicycles. The adoption process had been expedited through Michael's connections, but more importantly, through the obvious love and care he showed for Emma. Social workers who had been skeptical of a wealthy businessman's motives quickly saw the genuine bond between them. Emma bloomed under the stability and attention, while Michael discovered that fatherhood brought him a joy he'd never imagined possible. Harrison International had thrived beyond all expectations. The Yamamoto partnership had opened doors to markets throughout Asia, and Emma had become the company's unofficial cultural consultant, helping navigate complex international negotiations with wisdom that amazed seasoned diplomats. But today was special for reasons beyond business. It was Emma's first day at the exclusive Riverside Academy, a school chosen specifically for its programs for gifted children and its commitment to nurturing exceptional talents. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Michael asked as they walked hand in hand through the school's impressive entrance hall. Emma adjusted her new school uniform, a far cry from the worn clothes she'd arrived in 3 months ago, and smiled up at him. "A little bit, but Grandpa used to say that new beginnings are just chances to become even better than we were before." Her new teacher, Mrs. Chen, was a linguistics professor who specialized in working with children who showed exceptional language abilities. When Emma introduced herself in perfect Mandarin, Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up with delight. "Emma, I understand you speak several languages. Would you like to share with the class?" What followed was a demonstration that left her new classmates speechless. Emma moved effortlessly between English, Japanese, Spanish, French, and Italian, explaining that each language helped her understand different ways of thinking about the world. "Languages are like different colored glasses," she told her new friends. "Each one lets you see the same world in a completely different way. When you speak someone's language, you can understand their heart." During lunch, Emma found herself surrounded by children eager to be her friend. For the first time in her life, being different made her popular rather than isolated. Her intelligence was celebrated rather than feared, and her kindness attracted others like a magnet. Meanwhile, at Harrison International, Michael was in a board meeting when Patricia brought him a special delivery, a handmade card from Emma's class, thanking him for sharing their amazing friend with them. That evening, as they shared dinner in their penthouse dining room, Emma looked across the table at the man who had become her father in every way that mattered. "Dad," she said, still getting used to the word that felt like a gift every time she said it. "Do you think Grandpa knew this would happen? Do you think he somehow knew you would find me?" Michael set down his fork, considering the question seriously. Over the past 3 months, he'd come to believe that Emma's grandfather had been a man of extraordinary wisdom, someone who understood that love and purpose often intersect in mysterious ways. "I think your grandfather was a very smart man who loved you enough to prepare you for whatever life had in store. I think he taught you languages, not just because you had the gift, but because he knew that gift would lead you to exactly where you needed to be." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I miss him every day, but I'm not sad anymore. I think he sent me to you because he knew you needed a daughter as much as I needed a dad." After dinner, they settled into their evening routine, Emma reading to Michael from one of her many books, switching languages randomly and translating as she went. Tonight, she chose her grandfather's old Japanese book, the same one she'd been reading the night they met. Once upon a time, she began in English, then switched to Japanese for a few sentences before translating back. There was a little bird who got lost in a terrible storm. She was scared and alone, but she kept flying because she remembered her grandfather's words. Sometimes we have to lose our way before we can find our true home. As she continued the story, Michael realized that Emma was no longer just translating words. She was translating their entire experience, weaving their real-life fairy tale into the ancient Japanese folktale her grandfather had loved. And when the little bird finally found her new home, Emma concluded with a smile, she discovered it was even more beautiful than the one she'd lost, because it was filled with new love that would last forever. 1 year later, the Harrison International Tower buzzed with activity as employees prepared for the company's annual charity gala. But tonight's event was special. It was dedicated to funding a new program that Emma had inspired, the Emma Wilson Foundation for Gifted Children in Need. Emma, now 8 years old and even more remarkable than before, stood in Michael's office reviewing the evening's program in 3 different languages. She'd insisted that all the foundation's materials be available in multiple languages to ensure that no gifted child would be overlooked due to language barriers. "Dad, are you sure about my speech tonight?" she asked, adjusting the beautiful blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly. "It feels strange to have a foundation named after me." Michael straightened his tie and knelt down to her level, a gesture that had become their special ritual over the past year. "Emma, when you saved this company, you didn't just help me, you proved that extraordinary gifts can come from the most unexpected places. There are other children out there just like you, children whose talents are being overlooked because they don't have the opportunities they deserve." The foundation had already identified 12 children with exceptional abilities who were living in difficult circumstances. Through scholarships, tutoring, and mentorship programs, these children would receive the support they needed to develop their gifts and use them to help others. "Besides," Michael added with a smile, "it was your idea to create the foundation. You said that having special gifts means you have special responsibilities to help other people." As they made their way down to the gala, Emma clutched a special folder containing letters from children around the world who had heard her story. Some wrote in languages she was still learning, but each one expressed gratitude for showing them that being different could be a superpower rather than a burden. The ballroom was filled with New York's most influential business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists. But Emma moved through the crowd with the same natural grace she'd shown in the homeless shelter, treating everyone with equal respect and genuine interest. When it came time for her speech, Emma approached the podium with confidence that amazed the audience. She began in English, then seamlessly switched to Japanese to honor Mr. Yamamoto, who had flown in specifically for the event. She continued in Spanish to acknowledge the Latino families in the audience, then French for the international dignitaries present. "Ladies and gentlemen," she concluded in English, her young voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "my grandfather used to tell me that we all have gifts, but the most important gift is knowing how to use our other gifts to help people. Tonight, we're not just celebrating what I was able to do, we're promising to help other children discover what they can do too." The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes, but Emma's attention was focused on one person in the audience, an elderly Japanese man who was wiping tears from his eyes. After her speech, Mr. Yamamoto approached her with a special gift, a first-edition Japanese poetry book that had belonged to his own grandfather. "For the young lady who taught an old businessman that wisdom has no age," he said in Japanese, then translated for Michael's benefit. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself on the observation deck of the tower, looking out over the city lights with her father. Far below, she could see the homeless shelter where her journey had begun, now brightly lit and expanded thanks to a significant donation from Harrison International. "Dad, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the shelter that night?" Michael considered the question seriously. "I think somehow, some way, we would have found each other. Some connections are just meant to be." Emma leaned against the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, and smiled at the memory of her grandfather's words about angels sending exactly the right person at exactly the right time. "I think Grandpa would be proud of what we've built together," she said softly. "I know he would be, sweetheart, and I think he'd be amazed at how his little girl with the special gift for languages became a bridge between worlds, helping people understand each other across every kind of difference." As they stood together, looking out over the city, Emma pulled out her grandfather's old book one final time. The pages were more worn now, the binding held together with even more tape, but it remained her most precious possession. "Want to hear the end of the bird story?" she asked. Michael nodded, settling into the comfortable rhythm of their nightly tradition. And so the little bird learned that getting lost in the storm hadn't been a tragedy after all. It had been the beginning of her greatest adventure. She discovered that home isn't a place you find. It's a place you build with people who love you exactly as you are. And every day for the rest of her life, she used her gift of flight to help other lost birds find their way home too. Emma closed the book and looked up at Michael with eyes that sparkled with love, wisdom, and unlimited possibility. "The end," she whispered, but they both knew it was really just the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold in miraculous ways for years to come. Outside, the city hummed with the dreams and struggles of millions of people, some of whom would be touched by the Emma Wilson Foundation, some of whom would benefit from the expanded homeless shelter, and all of whom lived in a world made slightly better by the meeting of a desperate businessman and a gifted little girl, who proved that sometimes the most important miracles come in the smallest packages.